Spider-Man Miles Morales. 2 years after the first release of the original Spider-Man PS4 installment, which was loved and praised by almost everyone, we finally got our hands on the sequel spin-off. Spider-Man Miles Morales tells the story of Miles Morales year after he became Spider-Man, blah blah blah. I'm pretty sure you know the rest. Or you should at least, because this video contains spoilers. Personally, first when it was revealed in the first game that Miles Morales would become Spider-Man, I had my doubts about it. For me, Miles Morales works the best in a world where Peter Parker is dead. Which would be a shame to happen in the game universe, because it managed to create one of my favorite, if not my favorite, Peter Parker. My main problem with the two Spider-Man working together that I had in the comic books, or at least those that I read, I don't read them anymore because they're terrible, was that Miles always felt just like a sidekick to Peter. Which is a shame, because from his solo runs I really grew to like him as a solo hero. This game did the right thing from the beginning. They immediately got rid of Peter, and that's where the story for Miles properly began. It was now his time to become a hero and live up to the title of Spider-Man. But before I get to the story, let me just talk about the beautiful visuals. The graphics of the game on the PS5 looks absolutely gorgeous. Whoever made the decisions for the game to take place in winter is the greatest person in the universe and has my never dying gratitude. Even compared to the remaster of the original, this one looks just so much better. I'm guessing that snowy weather and Miles Morales now come hand in hand, and I have absolutely no problem with that. If they decide to make the sequel take place in winter and reuse the assets, I won't even complain about that. I would never complain about that. I still think that was a great decision making Arkham Origins take place in winter and reuse the assets from Arkham City. Yes, I think Arkham Origins is a good game, sue me. The characters look overall better and more alive, as you can tell just by looking at their hair or their clothes. The PS5 version takes a full advantage of the no loading screens feature, which is great. Although sometimes I miss just seeing Spider-Man traveling by the subway, at least I don't have the time to contemplate my life choices while looking at it. In fact, you will never have enough time to contemplate your life choices while playing a PS5 game. Speaking of the subways, the game has a lot of them, a lot more than its predecessor, which allows you to get to your destination more quickly than in the first game. Although most of the times you will just want to swing around and look at the beauty of the snowy New York, even though your mission is like 4 miles away. 4 miles, get it? Get it? Okay, when it comes to the web swinging and Miles' moves in general, while it has the same controls aside from minor changes for adjustment to Miles' powers, it does feel different. Peter's moves felt more calculated, Miles feels more agile, young and slick, and even sloppy at times, which is expected since it's his first solo adventure. Miles doesn't have as many gadgets as Peter had, but that's balanced by his newfound powers of Venom and invisibility. And oh boy, do I love the invisibility power. I abused the heck out of it during the base side missions, which is one of the greatest improvements in the game. You can now take the entire base down stealthily, is that the word? Well, it is now, and the enemies no longer come in waves, which was honestly mildly frustrating in the first game, because no matter what a stealth master you are, you would get noticed eventually. I only took 2 bases down completely stealthily because taking it out quietly felt too long for me. The enemies felt smarter, especially the underground, because they could move in higher places, making it harder to hide from them. A little detail that I have noticed was that Miles now takes off his mask during cutscenes with any suit, unlike Peter, who only took off his mask once with the default suit. I think that was a nice detail and improvement in the game, and I hope they bring it back into the sequel so I can finally see a Spider-Man game finale with the Raimi suit, which is the greatest suit in existence. Don't try to convince me otherwise. I also very much enjoy the app. At first I was like, well, Spider-Man app, well that's stupid. But it really reinvented the idea of a friendly neighborhood Spider-Man, something I think the first game was lacking. It introduced the majority of the side missions, including a Kingpin cameo, and a Kingpin cameo is always a great thing, but I will forever in my heart prefer my man, my brother, Vincent D'Onofrio. Now I'll move to the part of the game that I feel like fell a little behind from the first game, and that's the characters and the story. One of the most loved aspects of the first game was its characters and the story. The game effortlessly introduced Peter and his companions. Yuri, who single-handedly became one of my favorites despite having a little to no knowledge of her prior to the game. Aunt May, Otto Octavius, Martin Lee, 2 times Pulitzer Prize winning former publisher of the Daily Bugle J. Jonah Jameson, Miles, and even Mary Jane, that most people hated that I actually liked, because I feel like any Mary Jane that came before her just served only as a love interest for Peter and a tool to be saved by Spider-Man. This Mary Jane felt like she was actually doing something for the story and wasn't just there, something that I appreciated on the Gwen Stacy from the Amazing Spider-Man duology that I don't like much, but I like Gwen Stacy there. I still hate MJ's segment when I have to play with her though. The characters in the spin-off were not as developed and deep as in the first game due to the game's length. I knew that the game would be much shorter, but I still hope that there would be something more done with the characters. Except for Uncle Aaron. Uncle Aaron was great, the second best uncle of any Spider-Man. I love him. Genki was great too, but Miles' mom didn't really do much, do anything. She basically had the same role as May in the first game, but due to the game's length, again, I was more invested in May's work at Feast than Rio's political career. Finn's story was okay, but I wasn't very interested in it. I think it was a good decision to make the Tinker somehow related to Miles' backstory, because let's face it, nobody knows who Tinker is. I think Finn was a much better version of the character than the one in Homecoming. Yeah, because Tinker in fact was in Homecoming. Her name was a little bit of a giveaway, considering that the Tinker's comic book name is Phineas Mason. I would have preferred if it was Yuri, but I'm guessing they have a different story for her. Other than being a villain with a somewhat understandable motivation, she was a pretty boring character to me, and the storyline with her was predictable. Also found it a bit weird that a teenager was able to take over an entire mafia organization. Okay, never mind, it happened before. Also kinda disappointed in Jameson, because while in the first game his inclusion was mostly comedic, I still had a feeling that someone would listen to him, to what he had to say, but in the spin-off I had a feeling they just turned him into a clown for the sake of comedy and introduced Danica, the other podcaster, to counter Jameson's terrible show. What I think that was done right and better than in the first game was Miles' status and as a friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. As I mentioned before, his app really helped to develop this aspect, as you can feel the connection between Harlem and Spider-Man. Because the people really relied on Spider-Man as the only hero in Harlem, because there is nobody else to save them. Peter in his story felt more like a big time hero, you know, he worked with the police and whatnot, and so he didn't really feel like a friendly neighbor Spider-Man, but more of a big deal Spider-Man, if that makes sense. The end of the game was really a highlight for me when his friends, family and neighbors found out about his real identity. It felt so bizarre, such an anti-Spider-Man thing to happen. But then how they stood up for him was definitely the best thing in the game for me, and I love that scene so much. The scene had the same energy as the scene in Spider-Man 2 with the train, which is the greatest scene in the live-action Spider-Man movies. Oh, sorry, I mean the second best scene. So at the very end, Peter comes back, and so he tells Miles he's looking for a job, and Miles recommends teaching, and Peter said he never considered it and that it probably wouldn't be a job for him, which was a bit of an inconsistency considering he said this in the first game.
My ESU ID badge from my semester as a teaching assistant. Didn't have time to stick with it, but I could definitely see teaching again someday.
And a little bit of inconsistency, or I don't know if that would be considered that, because the thing that I'm about to show you wasn't really explained, but Peter of course said this in the first game too.
With this vial of the lizard's blood, I was able to mix up a cure and turn him back into Dr. Connors. Too bad it didn't last.
Then we've seen the Dr. Connors in the post-credit scene that I was waiting for finally. and working with Norman Osborn on the entire Harry thing, that I think that Harry's going to be Venom, so we're going to get Lizard and Venom in the third game, which I can wait for. But to sum it all up, I enjoyed the game very much as far as the gameplay goes. I think that the game improved upon every little flaw the first game had, and even though the story fell a little behind the first, I still think it wasn't a bad story. It was just a little predictable and a bit boring. So yeah, I would rate this game a solid 7.5367795. Yeah, that's the final rating for the game. So if you enjoyed this video, please leave a like. If you didn't enjoy this video, please leave a like. And if you didn't watch this video, please leave a like. And also subscribe to instantly become epic. And also ring the bell to get notified every decade when I actually publish a video. So yeah, thank you for watching, and I will see you next decade with the next video.